Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Further Comments. Now, this is the first episode in Season 2 when we're going to have a guest. And the guest today is Nick Abrahams from Norton Rose Fulbright in Sydney. Nick, welcome.
The one, the only.
Hi, Horace. Hi, David. This is the pinnacle of my career. It's taken me decades to get here, but I'm finally on this podcast. There were people who said it couldn't happen, and I said no to the naysayers. So here I am.
And I would say that pinnacle is really amazing given Nick Abrams' background and history. If you look at his history, there are Renaissance people and there are Renaissance people. And Nick, you are really, your career is the envy of me, certainly. So maybe could you tell people that aren't as familiar with you the wild and varied career that you've had?
Oh, wow. Okay, super quickly. I started off 4 years out of law school with a big law firm in Sydney, then 3 years in Tokyo. And then I had a very bad, really a personality flaw, guys, which I'll just share with you, which is I'd always wanted to be a Hollywood studio executive. And where I grew up on the outskirts of Brisbane, there's not a direct line from Brisbane to Hollywood. But anyway, I got there. I managed to get accepted in the University of Southern California Film School. And that's a pretty good film school. So George Lucas went there and they took 20 of us. And so I did film school. That was great. And then I got a job at Warner Brothers as what's called a creative executive.
Wow.
I had the job I'd always wanted, and I was working on ER and a show you may remember, The West Wing. That was all going well, and I had a side business, which is I owned a script, which I loved, and I needed to get a Hollywood star attached to it in order to get it financed. So I sent letters off to 100 agents and managers, hoping for one of their actors to take the role. And nothing happened for days and weeks. And then finally, one day, the phone went. And it was Woody Allen's manager. They said, Woody will do your film. So he did the film. The film's called Searching for Alison Portnick. We released it. And 6 months later, I got an Oscar. Oscar Alexander Abrahams, as it turns out. So the first three sons. And so Oscar is born while we're in LA. And I have this huge change of heart. And I'm like, I don't want to be a Hollywood studio exec. Hollywood is filled with sociopaths. I'm going to a place that has fewer sociopaths. I'm going to go back to the law. And so I returned then to Australia. And then I've been a technology lawyer for the last 23 years. And then I started a business called LawPath, and it's gone well. We can talk about that maybe later. And then also I teach a couple of programs at Bond University. I'm an adjunct professor there, really focused on how we can help lawyers to actually enjoy and thrive in the careers.
That is such an awesome story. Amazing.
How much of that is real, Nick, and how much of that was in the script?
It's all made up just for the podcast world. I'm actually an avatar, though I don't exist in real life.
When you said there's no straight line,
are you really a cat?
You said there's no straight line between Brisbane and Hollywood, but didn't Mad Max really open up the doors for Australian movies?
Well, it's true. Yeah. So what's interesting is people can name a couple of Australian movies and they can name, sort of the Hemsworths and a couple of other actors, but not too many. So it was, back in those days too, it was just it was very difficult. It was sort of the Paul Hogan era. But anyway, I managed to get in, and I loved my time at USC. That was fun. And, the film and TV world was weird, I have to say, but, interesting. So here we are.
I feel like I have to get a hobby now because I've got a musician on this call and I've got a movie star on this call. And here
you guys are
got nothing to my name.
I don't know if you've seen the tea leaves, but no one's watching long form film anymore. It's all about the podcast. The podcasters are the superstars of media for this generation. So you are right in the zeitgeist.
Tell that to the Marvel guys. Tell that to Tony Stark, who is now Dr. Von Doom.
Okay, there's some outliers. I give you that. Podcasting's the equivalent.
But speaking of outliers, Nick, I mean, your career is incredible, and you're definitely an outlier among the people who take the straight and narrow path and go from law school to professional career as a lawyer. And so you probably have a pretty unique perspective on what does it take to be a successful lawyer. So what's your take?
So I'll give you a take which is actually the synthesis of over 200 interviews that I've done. So, as I mentioned, I'm an adjunct professor at Bond University, and I started that around 4 years ago because I became obsessed with the weird two speeds that occur in our profession. And so there are those people who you speak to who love being a lawyer. And then there's more that you speak to who do not like being a lawyer, who feel trapped. And I saw the other side, right? I know what it's like. I had sort of the dream job, as it were. And yet I came back to the law because it delivered for me on a whole range of things that I knew were my core drivers. I knew what I wanted. That's why I mentioned, the story about Oscar being born. And that changed my purpose. So my purpose before that was, I'm going to help people by telling stories, and I'll be a Hollywood studio executive. And then, my purpose changed. So I'm like, okay, well, I don't want to do that anymore. I want to raise a family. I want to help people by being a lawyer. And so what I did was to go to Bond and research why is it that we've got this two speeds to our profession. And so interviewing over 200 global legal leaders and business leaders and consumers of legal services, as well as more than 100 just folks who are just sort of normal everyday lawyers, if you like. And what I found is I think there's about 20% of people are what I would call thrivers, and they love what they do. I mean, they talk about the profession of law like it's something amazing. You're like, that sounds great. And they're clearly are juiced by their job, and that's fantastic. And then I think 80% of people are the grinders. And so what I've tried to do is to distill what is it that makes for a great and satisfied lawyer. And so that's one of the courses that I teach at Bond University. It's just a short online course, career coaching intensive. And so there's 10 key skills, which I won't sort of bore everyone with today. But if we talk about what it takes to be a human lawyer and what made the lawyers who I felt really loved their jobs, what made them stand out was that idea of purpose. Like they totally knew what they were getting up every morning to do. It wasn't like I'm getting up to review, another 15 non-disclosure agreements. And it may have been that they did that, because I'm not saying that everyone who was successful was necessarily a thriver. Nor was everyone who wasn't successful necessarily a grinder. It was people who understood why it was that they got up. And that's why, for me, it's always been about helping people. That's why I'm delighted with sort of my side business, LawPath. We hit over 500,000 customers. So I'm like, that's fantastic. We've been able to democratize the legal process such that at the right price point, we could help out 500,000 people. So, yeah, what makes a great lawyer? The key thing is understanding your purpose. Why are you doing it?
There's an idea of ikigai in Japanese culture. That is, there's a Venn diagram of the things you love doing and the things that you're really good at and the things that the world needs and the things that you get paid for. So the intersection of those is ikigai, saying that I can be able to do all those things. Purpose is, of course, one of those. And I wonder is purpose the center of that Venn diagram?
Yeah, I think so. So it's such a great question, Amy. I really appreciate it, because what I struggle with, and I think we do a disservice to our younger folks when we tell them you must do what you're passionate about. Because I think what people take that to mean is, well, what do I like to? Well, maybe I like playing the drums, or maybe I like, watching, video games. I like playing video games. So I should go into that. I should be, a film director, or in my case, a studio executive. So you need to follow your passion. It's such a common phrase. But I don't think that's accurate for 99.99% of the population. I mean, there are some people, who can be Taylor Swift. But for most people, and I know, Damien, you love singing. I'm sure you've got a beautiful voice. But Pavarotti is probably not necessarily where we can all get to. So what does that mean then? It sort of feels like, well, if you can't become an unbelievable singer, then you can't ever follow your passion. And so I think that's a real problem. There's a huge amount of self-help that's focused on that. And I think it does this disservice, because where true purpose and passion comes from, I think, is you do something, you get good at it, and then you derive great satisfaction from being good at that And then in my case, at least, being able to help other people, whether that's bringing up junior lawyers by training them, whether, it's helping your clients every time when that phone goes at 6 p.m. on a Friday afternoon, you can look at that and go, that is going to be a problem because I'm going to have to work on the weekend. Or you can reframe it and say, well, it's a lucky situation. Someone trusts me enough with their problems that, they've asked me to do it, and I can use everything that I've learned for however long to help them out. So long-winded answer, but I do think purpose is critical.
Even a passion. Even Taylor Swift has aspects of her job that she despises. So even if you're chasing your passion, right, there's still aspects of your job. Comedians say they love their job, but from 8 a.m. until 6 p.m., they're just walking around the city bored out of their gourds, right? So there's the aspects of that are your passion. And then there are aspects of your job that often suck, but you still have a purpose to be able to do these things.
Yeah. And purpose also drives grit. When times are tough, what gets you through is grit. As you said, it's a great point. Not everyone has a wonderful time 24/7. And sometimes, life and careers and so forth, there's stuff that happens which is totally unfair. And what are you going to do? I mean, and grit gets you through. It's just, okay, well, I'm just going to punch through.
It's a lot like the whole startup scene, right? The advice that a lot of VCs give you is it's not about passion. It's about consistency and determination and the effort you put in. How passionate you are may be one factor, but it's not always the determinant for success.
And you do need to have passion, but there's also needs to be an element of realism and understanding, what's achievable and what's not achievable, because the last thing you want is a founder who is blind to, what the market is telling them or what the customers are telling them and so forth. So there's a combination of things. I mean, I find founders infinitely fascinating because they see things that aren't there and they push through, and despite lots of criticism and people not necessarily wishing them well, they make it happen. So
it's a healthy balance of, I was about to make a joke about, it's a healthy balance between hallucination and realism.
I think fake it until you make it is hallucination after all, right? So we've been talking about purpose, and we've also been talking about being able to do startups. And of course, purpose and startup leads us to AI. What else is there to talk about but AI? So let's talk about what is a lawyer's purpose in the age of AI. And what should startup builders that are building an AI, what should they be serving? What purposes should be served for the lawyers and to their clients?
Yeah, great. So I should probably lead with this. And I know this is not necessarily a popular view, because I know lots of people think that, there's not going to be work for lawyers and so forth. I completely disagree. There's various commentators who say, jobs for lawyers are going to zero in, the next 10 years. I just don't think that is happening at all. I think the role of the human expert, when there's so much disinformation out there, I think the role of the human expert becomes even more important. And just a tale from LawPath, as I said, we've got 500,000 customers. We just got a $10 million investment. Well, it wasn't always like that. So 5 years ago, LawPath was a disaster. We had this idea. It was a DIY solution, 500 legal documents, and it was designed to serve small business. And the whole thesis was, well, if you're a small business person and it's 9 o'clock at night and you need an employment agreement, great, I'll just go on to LawPath, I'll download it, fill it out, send it out. Zero interest at $30 a month or at $5 a month. No interest in that. Complete DIY solution. And then to save the business, and we were literally going to close it, to save it, we tweaked the model. And we said you get unlimited access to 500 legal documents and unlimited calls with lawyers. And the business took off almost overnight. So I think that in a world that is as complicated as law, now we're lawyers, so we don't necessarily see the complexity that people outside it do. But if you're not a lawyer, the law is a terrifying place because you don't know how bad could be. And so I think that there is always going to be a role for the human expert. And I actually think AI makes the law a more complicated place, or makes the world a more complicated place. And lawyers thrive on complexity. We're certainly seeing things like disputes. I think the democratization of law and the legal process is going to profoundly lead to an increase in the amount of disputes that we see. We're already seeing it coming through. So When I think about what AI will do for the future, I think that developers and business people should be thinking, how do we really augment the lawyer and make sure that the lawyer is still in the loop? And just one last, I know I've spoken for a long time, but just one last story, because I think calling the end of any profession is a dangerous thing to do. There's a guy called Geoffrey Hinton. He's a brilliant man, so the godfather of AI. Him. Okay, fantastic. Okay, so, and so Hinton, so he gets the Nobel Prize a couple of months ago, genius. But in 2016, he said of radiologists that they're like the coyote who's just gone off the cliff and about to plummet to their death. And we shouldn't ever train any more radiologists. In 5 years, we won't need them because the machines are so good at reading scans. So we roll forward now, that was 2016, we roll forward to 2025, and he couldn't have been more wrong. So jobs for radiologists in the US have increased by 1.4% a year, every year since 2016. There's now a global shortage of radiologists, and that's because Hinton did not take into account human nature. And human nature is that we don't lay down and surrender to the technology. It's not like the radiologist said, oh, great, well, I'll just throw away that 10 years of training because the machines are so good and I might become a barista. That's not the way we work. So the radiologists grab the technology and they use it to provide greater insights to their patient condition. And I see that as the tremendous opportunity. So let's use the AI to do the work that is not meaningful to lawyers, that is not particularly satisfying, and there's plenty of that. So the AI can help with that, and then lawyers will lift and be able to provide these greater services to their clients and stakeholders.
I love both of those things. I want to emphasize what you said earlier is that the anecdote about nobody wanted to buy the documents, but once you threw a lawyer in there, everyone wanted to do it. I think that we lawyers really have to think long and hard as to what we're selling. Are we selling, number one, are we guardians to the law? That is, do we know the cases, statutes, and regulations better than anyone? Are we selling that guardianship? Number two, are we just selling widgets? That is the documents that we're creating. Or number three, are we selling trust? Are we telling our clients, I've got your back. Your problem is now my problem. You're in safe hands with me. And I think so many people underestimate number three. They think we're just selling widgets, or they think that we're just interpreting the law. But no, we're selling trust. That's what we're doing.
Yeah. Oh, look, I really love that line of thought, because it does drive me crazy when you've got folks like Goldman Sachs say that the AI can do what 44% of lawyers do, because it pitches into this really familiar trope that is out there, which is that we're some sort of automatons and somehow all we do is replace variable data points in standard form contracts. And every lawyer knows that it's a very human skill. We've over 500,000 customers in LawPath. You would have thought a couple of those might be pretty similar, but for whatever reason, there's nuance to everything. And so I think, Damien, to your point, that idea of what are we selling? And we're not just selling a due diligence report. It's the outcome. What does the client actually want out of that? I mean, you could charge them sort of $5,000 or you could charge them $100,000. What would be truly valuable is they just want to know, is there a problem with this business? Now, if you can figure out a way to do that incredibly cheaply, then they will love that. And then you'll get an opportunity to do more, which is how do we rectify it, once you actually buy the business over. So it's a little bit like Excel. When Microsoft Excel came out, there was this thought that would get rid of a lot of what accountants do, because back in those days, accountants did a lot of book entry work. But that didn't happen. The accountants got a hold of Excel and just leveled up with the sort of insights that they provide. And so now accountants are far more business advisors than they used to be, more like, just recording accounts.
Mm.
I think that we are truly counselors as lawyers. Accountants are counseling, and we are truly counseling too, as both literal and figurative counselors. When we think about what we're counseling about, it's risk. I'd worked as a litigator for a bunch of years, and then I worked in cybersecurity, and I realized, these are the same job. I did litigation risk, and then I was doing what's the risk of getting hacked? What's the risk of getting popped, right? And then my cybersecurity company was owned by an insurance company. And I was like, insurance companies do risk too. Right? They're saying, what's the risk of getting hit by a hurricane? The difference, though, is that insurance companies price that risk. They have a bunch of quants on staff that they say, what is the statistical likelihood of this hurricane hitting this location? And then they say, okay, if it does hit, then what is the pricing of damage? And then they price that risk in this way. So I guess, Nick, as somebody who has the intersection of law and technology, what do you think about us essentially following insurance's lead by essentially quantifying risk and then being able to maybe price risk in a quantifiable way, legal risk in a quantifiable way?
I agree with that. I think we are in the risk business. I will answer your question, but I would also like to just expand it, because I think what we can do is we can also be creators of great opportunity. And, the classic example is we understand the regulatory framework, and what clients want to understand is what are the opportunities. So to actually come up with solutions that can help clients create revenue opportunities. So it's definitely risk, and it's all assessing the risk. I think of risk as sort of perhaps a little bit on the we're on the downside protection, but I think we can move to, and I think many good lawyers are very much on that upside value creation proposition. To answer your question, which is quantifying risk, so there's an interesting AI solution out there now where what they've done is they've ingested all of the billing data for this particular insurance company. And then they are able to create these playbooks. And so whether it's a slip and fall or whether it's a car accident, the insurance company, when it's briefing that piece of litigation out, it gives the law firm this playbook and says, here's the playbook, you must abide by the playbook. And the playbook has in it all of the tasks that need to be done. And then what is the level of lawyer that is the optimal level of lawyer to actually do that task, so that there can't be overcharging and so forth. And so what we've seen there is a flipping of the traditional approach to briefing out, which is normally when things were briefed out, the law firm took control of things. Now I think you're seeing very much the client can be in control of things far more, and the law firm becomes more of an execution role. And so that is chilling, I think, for law firms, because we need to figure out how we add value outside of what the machine does. So probably not a full answer, but that would be sort of the way that I see the benefits of technology.
Is this a little bit like, Damien, the conversation we had previously where we're talking about how had this cream, core, and commoditized sort of model, and as work gets pushed from the cream to the core to commoditize, it's easier and easier to quantify because you can just repeat and repeat and repeat. Is it a little bit like that?
It seems that way. And I think, if commoditized, there's enough data to be able to actually quantify. Any statistical likelihood is only as good as how large its data set is. A very tiny data set, you're not going to have enough to say statistical likelihood, I guess. By nature, the cream, like if this is a bet the company lawsuit that only happens once in a generation, it's a black swan. You don't have any other data. So I think, yes, you're right. Necessarily, as we push down, we're going to be able to quantify better. Doing that quantification. Lidler Mendelson is doing that quantification. Fisher Phillips is doing that quantification. Ogletree is doing that quantification. The question is how far up to the core, and probably we'll never get to the cream, but how much into the core are we going to be able to quantify?
So Accenture's in-house team, and I've got a couple of case studies on them in my bond courses. Accenture's legal team, they spend a lot of time. They realised a couple of years ago that they were taking quite a strict approach to contracting. And in fact, they were not well liked. The legal team was not well liked across the customer spectrum because they were just tough. So this led the whole organisation to have a good look at what were those things that they were sticking on. Why were they, holding really tight on various provisions and refusing to budge on those? And then they took a view, okay, well, maybe we can relax on those things, because they understood the risk. They looked at it and said, okay, what's happened? How many times have we been sued on that particular point, on IP point or whatever? So really knowing what the risk outcome was, rather than just in a, lawyers love to play that sort of disaster scenario bingo when you're negotiating. It's like, well, someone could get electrocuted by the software, and you're like, that's never happened in the history of the world, but well, it could happen. So, okay. So they actually spent a lot of time understanding those risks, and then they basically re-engineered their risk profile across the organisation, and very quickly became a very popular or much easier organisation to deal with. So they've then taken that one step further because they know so much about their risk profile. They've now got an agentic solution, which basically means if you're in the business in Accenture and you've got an NDA or a services agreement or an addendum that you need reviewed, you put it into the agentic solution, and the agentic solution does one of three things. It either decides that that contract is within negotiation parameters, acceptable parameters, and then just queues it up immediately for e-signing, no human in the loop, or it decides that it needs to be amended, and in which case it does the amendment and sends it back to the business person for sending to the other side, or it decides that it does need something, a human in the loop, and then it will send it off to a lawyer. Now that is, to getting to your stratification point there, when does something become commoditized? Obviously that lower level stuff where the machine is able to make that decision, that's commoditized, obviously, but they can only get there because they've done that work to understand very deeply what their risk profile is and what the negative outcomes could be of things. So I think the opportunity is there, but you do need, Damien, to your point, that scale. You need a lot of data to validate your positions.
So Jason Bardwell, guest of the podcast, has said that we as lawyers are different than him as an engineer. He is both. He said that engineers look at things and say, here are disparate things that I can kind of group together. And lawyers say, here's how my thing is totally different than all the other things. And so you, Nick, as somebody who has one foot in the legal realm and another in the technology realm and who has gotten those 500 documents in your company, how do you navigate the engineer outlook and the lawyer outlook?
Oh, it's incredibly frustrating. And that's why I think those people, the sort of, that machines can do 44% of what lawyers can do, it's not magic. The technology is great. I'm not denying, and it's more technology than I ever expected to see in my lifetime. But even with AI, what we see is the nuances. There's just so many different things that can occur with an individual matter. And so it's just very difficult to cover that. And the problem with law is we are driven to 100%. I mentioned Accenture. They could only get comfortable with that agentic solution by recognizing that they're not going to be at 100% accuracy. There will be something will slip through, but they form the view that the return on investment is such that for the stuff that falls through, we gain much greater efficiencies. So I think it's very difficult for a law firm to do that with a client because clients are not in the business of saying, you know what, you can get this 90% right and we'll pay 90% of the fee. That's not the game we're in. The game we're in is you get this 100% right, and if you don't, then there's consequences. So I think it's very hard. And that's why I think law firms have to work with their clients because there's a bunch of pain points that clients have which they would love to be solved and which I would be very comfortable with having a less than 100% accuracy of the output, provided that they knew what that was going into it. So I think there's an opportunity for doing that. So but I agree entirely with the point that, engineers do seek commonality, whereas I think with law, because of the fact we're driven to 100% accuracy, it's often you see the outliers.
Let's talk a little bit about that 100%, because my friend Casey Flaherty will often show that double-blind studies for e-discovery, for example, for technology-aided review, he'll tell lawyers, hey, this tool is 85% accurate. And the lawyer says, we require 100% accuracy. And then he'll say, no, double-blind studies show that humans are only 65% accurate. And then they say, not
our humans.
Right, exactly. Well, show me the proof. And then you show the proof. Right. And then you say, well, our humans are better than average, right? And so greetings from Minnesota, Lake Wobegon, where all the women are strong, the men are good looking, and all the children are above average, right? All the lawyers are above average. The idea that we as lawyers, we certainly strive for 100%, but how often do we fall short of that goal? And how many false negatives, how many double-blind studies are there really to show that we really aren't 100%? And really, are we just kind of going through a delusion of 100%, even though we're far lower than that?
Yeah. What people would say is that the structures are set up within law firms to try to achieve 100%. So you've obviously there's initial work that's often done at a junior level, and then there's quality control. Now, that's not at the level of, a Toyota quality control, obviously, but I think that would be the argument to say that we are striving towards that. And if we are not getting there, then there would be repercussions to it. So I fully accept that, what happens there, it may not be 100%, but what we've got is entrenched conventions where people will be like, okay, well, that was sort of as good as you could expect within the circumstances. And so, likelihood of lawsuit and so forth for malpractice becomes much lower. So I think it's all about those entrenched ways of working. I mean, I would love for this to change overnight, but I've just seen with LawPath, oh my gosh, unless it is, 10x better, faster, and cheaper, that would sell your solution. But in some respects, it's probably got to be, 50x or 100x to break through just the entrenched. And it's not because people aren't willing to change. This is just the structure that we have. So it's the nature of, the way the in-house teams work, the way the law firms work, the way the courts work, the way our legal regulatory framework sits over the top around, what we're allowed to do and what we're not allowed to do. So I think it's very difficult to crack that. E-discovery's come a long way. And so I think there's far more preparedness to accept that now. But you think the reason for e-discovery being such a success when every other area, I think largely of legal tech up until 2022, 23, was a bit not great, is because e-discovery is a $10 billion a year business in the US standalone. So lots of venture capitalists put money into e-discovery tech, but not much into necessarily other areas, due diligence tech and so forth. I think it'll take time for that concept of we can trust the machines and we can be okay if the machine doesn't get to 100%. But it's a very difficult discussion to have with a client right at the moment.
I love that you mentioned the word trust again, because it's now trust in a different context of it's not trusting the human expert, it's trusting the machine as a replacement for the human expert. Like at some point, those have to equate. And if they don't, no change will happen.
And also trust in the vendor of the machine. That is, Horace, congratulations on saying that a lot of law firms trust Cynthia. You got number 3 on that study. So kudos. So yes, you have to trust the
number
lawyer.
Number 7 for Felix too.
It's quite fun. But they trust the lawyer, trust the software, and trust the vendor. I think trust all around.
Yeah. And Horace, I mean, you are quite right. It is about trusting the machine and trusting the vendor. And congratulations, guys. That idea of when will people be happy with no guarantee of 100%? And could you have that discussion? And it's just an interesting point, because I don't think anyone's up for necessarily the discussion around we'll get the humans to do it. You only pay 90% of the fee if it's only 90% accurate. Like I don't feel like that's a conversation that you can have terribly often. But I have struggled with clients where we've proposed AI solutions and we talk about the idea of we can guarantee it to 90%. And clients are not keen on that idea. And, the more important the issue, then the harder it is to get that idea across. So I think for those organizations that have done the work, that understand the downside risk and can quantify it, then I think they'll be more prepared to engage the technology earlier and accept that there is, a risk at sub 100% performance.
I'm going to propose a thought experiment. And the thought experiment is this. Rather than saying to a client, hey, I'll get it 90% right for 90% of the fees, what if you said, I'll get it 90% right for 1% of the fee?
Yeah.
Or 2%?
Yeah.
Or 3%? At what point do market forces go, you know what? Yeah, I'll take that.
I lost a bid the other day. It's still very fresh and painful. And I was 10% of the winning bid. So my proposed fee using AI was 10% of the winning bid.
Wow.
But I could only guarantee to 90%. And they were like, it's a big deal. It's a big issue. We can't go with that. So that was a 10% proposition. So we were 10% of the fee. So yeah, I mean, this was, there was some risk to this. And so I understand why they came to that conclusion. But for other things, I think, that would be a no-brainer. If it's non-disclosure agreement, do we really, how critical are those things? Obviously we need them and but the reality is very few people sue on non-disclosure agreements. So is there a way that you could do those for a tenth of the cost or 1% of the cost? Then I think we build into that. We need to focus on what are those use cases where people will be prepared to accept that there's not a 100% guaranteed outcome.
That's really smart. I've been talking with some of my legal tech friends whose names you know that I'm not going to say. And we said, isn't it amazing that we are in this period of time where AI, a machine, can understand the law?
It's interesting, that AI understands the law. It sort of comes back and it looks like it understands the law, but it obviously doesn't, there's no, it's not cognitive at its simplest. I guess it's a next word predictor. And it just happens to be incredibly good at doing that. I think
stringing together coherent concepts. Yeah.
I mean, so I wonder, what does that mean for the way we think about the future of training lawyers and so forth? So that's sort of an area where I think a lot about, because I think there's a great opportunity there for us to be able to use the AI to provide better training than lawyers have had. With the traditional approach, this apprenticeship style model that we have, the first 3 or 4 years of your practice can sort of make or break a legal career. If you're lucky to have a really, diligent and good person who trains you, then hey presto, you are really out of the gates, and that's great. But if you have someone who doesn't care terribly much or doesn't help you out as much, then it's not very good. So is there a way that we can use the AI in terms of simulations, where you could have people doing simulations and you could be ticking the box in terms of your learning outcomes, and then be comfortable that after 6 months of doing simulations, they had all the same learning outcomes of 4 years of doing discovery or early stage litigation at one of the major firms. I mean, that to me is an exciting prospect. As I talked before, I'm very concerned about the burnout and the fact that we have so many people who don't like being a lawyer. And then we've got this thin layer of folks who love it. And imagine a world where we don't burn people as hard on the stuff that's not particularly satisfying to do. And they pop through into a world where they actually enjoy being lawyers and enjoy doing the interesting stuff, which is actually counseling clients and actually using the knowledge that you have to help them in their businesses or whatever they need to do. So that's sort of a hope that I have.
Yeah, I think that the halcyon days of baby lawyers really cutting their teeth on document review and due diligence, I think that's a fiction in almost everyone's mind, especially those of us that I did, reviewed probably millions of documents over the course of my baby career. The learning curve of saying, is it responsive or non-responsive? Is it privileged or is it not privileged? That's maybe a half-day learning curve, and the rest of that time was just wasted time. That was not making me a better lawyer. It was merely just, billing hours, to be frank. Maybe the AI doing the work actually now allows me to do client negotiations and to be able to explain to the client, here are your options. How do we get the business objectives done? That's the work of the lawyer, not the document review and the AI type stuff.
Yeah. And maybe it's a little bit like with the accountants. So the accountants really have leveled up. And you look at, the Big Four, for example. Now, most of what they do these days is consulting. It's not, accounting work. That's a tiny fraction of their revenue. And so maybe that's where we go to. And it doesn't necessarily mean that, we're consultants doing the same sort of consultancy that exists in the Big Four. And I think the key to it is understanding client pain points. And so I think there needs to be more focus. I know you guys know this, particularly Horace, in, when you're starting a business, you need to be very Rapier-like in your focus. I think that if we spend more time thinking about what are our clients' pain points and what could we do, not only with our existing inventory of solutions, whether we're litigators or M&A lawyers or whatever, but what are their pain points and what could we do to help them leveraging the base that we have, then I think there's a real opportunity.
And what can you do within a law firm, and what do you need someone from outside the law firm to do? What is the value you can create internally versus having to look externally?
One of the things which comes up in the research that I've done around what makes a great human lawyer is that ability to form relationships, because lawyers, the good ones, are very good at having long-term relationships and not being particularly transactional necessarily. So that might be, a law firm working with an AI vendor to provide a solution to a client or, class of clients. So I feel like that's a very exciting proposition. Now that underpins the revenue of the Big Four. Now, if you look at most of their revenue, a significant portion of it is generated because they are doing systems integration work where they are the channel for a particular piece of technology. Now, it seems to me that that's an opportunity for law firms. If you look at the same idea, it's like the reason that the Big Four are systems integrators is because they're very close to their clients. They know the pain points. And so they own that client relationship. And then the technology company is the engine that the Big Four can use to actually integrate the solution. So, there is an opportunity for all law firms. You have that good, deep client relationship. The law firm can work with the technology vendor to provide the solution for the client.
Inject their data and their expertise into the language models to provide workflows and solutions. And I think that's happening right now with Harvey and Legora, and even Google and Freshfields might be doing that too. So, Nick, you might be talking about something that's happening right now.
Oh, I think it's definitely happening. I think we'll see more of it. It's hard because law, we haven't had to partner before, but I think its time has come for sure.
We at VLEX are doing a lot of those things too. I think the winners in this are going to take a lot of the things from lawyers' brains and put them into artifacts that could be used by tools, either internal tools, external tools, or connecting both those internal and external tools. The game is going to be won by transferring that stuff from the brain into artifacts. I really like, Nick, your other point about the relationships and being able to be connectors between the pain points of your business people and what you and a lawyer can do. I think a lot about Malcolm Gladwell's tipping point and talked about the idea of weak ties, the idea that as you build relationship with a client, that you build weak ties within all of them. And as you serve the client's needs, serving those weak ties and saying, hey, there was a business person that I met once. That's really the trust that we're going back to, right? That through weak ties, you build trust amongst the entire organization, which will help the law firms and help the clients.
Yeah. I mean, that's been the genius of the Big Four professional services firms is they've spent a lot of time on those client relationships, and what are they called? The passkey partners. So they're the partners who are so well trusted by the big clients that they have security access to their floors. And so, to have that level of relationship means that you will get opportunities to do things.
That's true. We're coming close to our end. We like to end our episodes by asking what makes our guests optimistic, what makes Horace optimistic, and what makes me optimistic. So maybe, Horace, do you want to start us off with optimism? I'll do it, and then we'll give Nick the last word on optimism.
Oh gosh, I actually, on my way down to record, thought about what makes me optimistic. And this is not going to be about legal or tech at all. And it was my 3-year-old little girl saying to me, Daddy, can I give you a hug before going downstairs? And that was something that made me feel like there's optimism and hope in the world still.
That is a lovely thing. So I'm going to follow those lines and also not do legal or tech, but really we were able to visit my kid who goes to school at University of Wisconsin-Madison, and we did the 5-hour drive there. And we spent a lovely weekend with my kid as we sat in the sunshine, enjoying each other's company. I thought, the world can go on fire, but we and our family are doing just fine. So anyway, so that's my optimism. Nick, what do you? And we usually talk about what you're optimistic with, the law and technology, but really can say whatever you're optimistic about.
So, your two points have been beautiful. I'll assume a slightly different tack on it. So what makes me optimistic for the future of law? And I am very optimistic. And I also think those that talk down the future of law fall into the sort of Geoffrey Hinton style trap. And so what makes me optimistic is... So if I look at, the US Treasury, they put out a draft set of regulations around crypto, and then a particular crypto player didn't like those draft regulations. So created an AI app that allowed people to create submissions. And so the regulatory agency, the Treasury, was expecting 200 to 300 submissions, got 120,000 submissions, all of which it had to review. And so what I think is that AI democratizes the legal process. It is capable of being weaponized in a bad way, as we've seen with that example. But we see, I think in the Harvard Business Review, number 23 of the top 100 uses of AI was creating complaints. I think that AI is going to increase the amount of work for lawyers. And I think that that's a reason to be optimistic for lawyers, not necessarily great for the rest of the world. But I think when we think about the process and of law, it is good that more people will have access to it. But what it does mean is that we are still going to need a lot of lawyers. So I'm very optimistic for the future of our profession.
A lot of trusted lawyers.
Amen.
Hope so.
So with that, let's end on that note of positivity, that we're all going to have a purpose, a job, and a future, even in a world filled with AI. Nick, thank you so much for joining us. Damien,
Thanks very
a
much,
pleasure as always.
Yeah, it was really great fun talking with you, Nick. And yeah, we look forward to seeing your return to Hollywood at some point. You have a third act, perhaps. Thanks, everyone.
See you soon.